Which bad offenses should you be targeting this offseason? We'll tell you on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at some bad offenses that you should try to target this offseason because you look, Kate, at some of the top offenses this year: Washington, Minnesota, Denver, Arizona, Atlanta. These were all bad offenses last year, but they probably helped you win your dynasty championship this year. Which bad offenses are you looking to target this offseason?
I'm going to start with the New England Patriots, who I think have a really bright future. Now, we obviously are kind of in the middle of some chaos there in New England. They just fired first-year head coach Drake Maye. They don't have a ton of weapons, but you know what they have, Marcus? They've got a quarterback, and they've got a lot of money to spend, a lot of moolah. And I think what they're going to do is use that moolah to bolster the supporting cast around Drake Maye. I think they're going to invest in the offensive line. I think that, again, based on what we've seen this past year, let's not forget how aggressive they were in the market to get one of these top tier wide receivers. They were very aggressive in a move for Brandon Ayuk. They were trying to get any of these top tier receivers into New England. And I think that that's a very promising sign that, like, yes, they're all in on Drake Maye as their future, and they want to do whatever they can to support his efforts in terms of getting a productive offense. Now, investments in the run game, that's going to help, or investments in the offensive line, that's going to help the run game. I just think, generally speaking, the New England Patriots are looking at an upward trajectory that is going to be very beneficial for fantasy managers.
So the key here is identifying which players on offense could potentially get a major bump in value with just the offense being better in year two. We expect them to try to sign a big-time receiver in free agency, right? We also expect them to maybe draft somebody with the number 4 pick in the draft. Maybe that's Ted McMillan from Arizona. Maybe it's Travis Hunter. We'll see. But is there anybody in this offense right now that you're wanting to buy low on? I think I know one of the names you're going to mention.
I'm going to say I still think Drake Maye, probably a buy low candidate. I know obviously he's had a really successful rookie season, but generally speaking, like I think, he's a player that not a ton of people watched a lot of this year because not much primetime action here for the New England Patriots. But a player that I think, generally speaking, showed a lot of promise. And I think just, we have the knowledge that he's got a ton of athleticism. He's super, super young. He's only 22 years old. And I want whatever pieces I can get of Drake Maye, especially when the stat sheet wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. 15 passing touchdowns. It was, it was whatever. But I believe in the ceiling of Drake Maye as being that much higher.
I'm going to pick a different offense I want to talk about. I think Carolina is one that I'm going to be looking at this offseason. You look at down the stretch, Drake Maye. Bryce Young was pretty doggone good. I saw the numbers today, Kate. Since he rejoined the starting lineup, Bryce Young was the 6th overall graded quarterback, according to PFF, 3rd highest big-time throw rate in the NFL. Now, I'm not expecting Bryce Young to become like an MVP candidate or anything, but this offense was so bad earlier in the year. But in the second half of the year, much, much better. We saw them put up 44 points against Atlanta in week 18. I got to believe with a full offseason with Dave Canales, Bryce Young is going to be even better. And the thing I like the most about this offense is everyone's cheap, right? Chuba Hubbard is cheap. You can get any of the pass catchers that you want cheap. Jatavian Sanders going into year 2, you can get him outside the top 15 tight ends. So you can actually stash several of these guys on your roster, and it's not really going to cost you anything.
Yeah, I love the Chuba Hubbard take in particular. Now, I can't say enough about Chuba Hubbard. I can't say enough about how much I like Jonathan Brooks, but let's not forget, second ACL tear.
Mm-hmm.
And they did just give Chuba Hubbard this extension. Now, look at the stats, okay? Almost 1,200 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns on this offense, like the Carolina Panthers offense, the 2024 Carolina Panthers offense. And you posted that kind of number, 54 targets over 15 games. Like, you're telling me that I feel like kind of the floor that we've established right now is, 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns. I'm going to take that all day. And I think, the ghost of Jonathan Brooks is going to kind of suppress the value of Chuba Hubbard. But this is probably going to be a guy that once again wins fantasy managers some championships, or at least takes them there. I know he wasn't around for this one.
I'm going to give you one more offense, and this is a very obvious one. The Chicago Bears, they're going to have a new head coach this offseason. We don't know who that's yet. I think the hope is that if you have Caleb Williams or Rome Odunze or DJ Moore, that it's an offensive-minded head coach, maybe Ben Johnson, although I'm not sure how likely that is. Yeah, I think even someone like Mike McCarthy, who the Bears are interested in hiring, would be a massive upgrade on that side of the ball. So I think if you're trying to buy into this Bears offense, you're hoping that they get one of these offensive-minded head coaches. I think that's pretty likely to happen.
Yeah, and from like a talent evaluation standpoint, we know that this Bears offense is really rich in talent. Like Rome Odunze's production, in the last 2 games of the season, 33 receiving yards, 3 catches. That's going to leave a really sour taste in dynasty managers' mouths. But again, I look back to a player, like JSN, who I strongly believed in the scouting report. I believed in the tape, didn't pop on the first year, but I do think that 1 year is generally too short a time to give up on your pre-draft evaluation of a player. And Rome Odunze is a guy that I evaluated really highly in this 2024 class. I think, 734 yards and 3 touchdowns is a much better stat line that I feel like fantasy managers, feel like they got to reap the benefits of. I think the ceiling for him is sky high, especially with a quarterback with as much upside as Caleb Williams. This is going to be a duo that I want to target all offseason long.
All right, let's talk about some bad offenses that we're going to try to stay away from, because not every bad offense is going to be a buy this offseason. Let's talk about a couple offenses that we are completely out on going into the 2025 offseason next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in award winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. I can't wait to do it for Super Wildcard Weekend. We've got some great games. I think we're going to have some high-scoring games. And here is a special offer for our Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We're talking about some offenses that we want to target this offseason. But first, Kate, let's get to some ones that we're going to avoid. Are there any of these bottom tier offenses, whether it's like the Browns, Giants, Raiders, Titans, Jets? Which of those are you completely avoiding this offseason?
Can we just start with the Browns? Can we just rip that Band-Aid off? Because I want absolutely nothing to do with any dynasty shares within that organization. Now, that's for a few reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of dysfunction in the organization in general. Obviously, there's a big question mark at quarterback. We have Deshaun Watson, who's kind of locked into this deal. They just did a big restructuring on his contract to kind of, disperse some of the financial hit, but it's still not going to be good for the Browns in any foreseeable future here, which is going to, I think, limit their resources just pretty extensively. I worry that this Browns organization is just going to be bad for a long time. And we know that bad offenses with bad passing situations who have limited resources, like this is going to be a really long rebuild. And I think from a dynasty perspective, I really like Cedric Tillman, but do I like Cedric Tillman, with, I don't know, name your quarterback, Dorian Thompson
Dorsey.
Robinson?
Well, can I push back a little bit on Browns because I actually disagree a little bit here. I'm not all in on Cleveland. However, I never thought the Ken Dorsey hire as the offensive coordinator made sense. They hired him to work with Deshaun Watson. They thought that Dorsey's offense, which is more of a shotgun-based offense, would be better for Watson. That obviously didn't turn out to be the case. So they fired him. And according to Andrew Berry, their GM, they're going to let Kevin Stefanski go back to running his offense, and he's going to be the primary play caller. And I think Stefanski is a really good offensive-minded coach. So I actually like that part of it. I don't think Deshaun Watson ever starts a game in Cleveland again. He had a setback with his Achilles injury. Would you agree? Like, do you ever see Watson playing again in Cleveland?
No. And I think from multiple angles, I think physically speaking, it seems like 2025, especially off the table. But my concern is like, it's not necessarily just Watson. It's, do they have enough resources as an organization to overcome the damage that Watson and the ramifications of that deal, in the financial ramifications of being handcuffed to a very expensive quarterback? Like, how do they overcome that as an organization over the next couple of years? Because they're not going to have the financial resources to make a ton of other investments elsewhere because they're kind of handcuffed. Now, do they go quarterback with their number 2 pick?
I think that's possible. I don't know if that's likely. My guess is that the Browns are going to trade out of that spot to try to accumulate assets and draft picks because that's just what Andrew Berry does. So I wouldn't be surprised if they like flip with the Raiders and the Raiders come up and get Shedeur Sanders. Not ruling that out, but here's what I think happens, Kate. I think the Browns become the number one destination for teams that are like just dumping quarterbacks. Basically what Pittsburgh did last year with Russell Wilson, right? Where they're paying Russell nothing because Denver's paying it. So maybe they end up becoming the landing spot for Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr or Geno Smith, or name your quarterback. I think that's not a bad spot. And frankly, I think if Kirk Cousins is the quarterback there, I know it was not great this year, but a full year removed from his Achilles, I wouldn't be surprised if this is an offense that is much, much better than what we saw this year.
I don't know. I'm having trouble.
We saw them be really good with Jameis this year. Like at times, like put up a ton of points when they had Jameis at quarterback.
They did, but it was also fantasy points, right? We've talked about how for Anthony Richardson, for example, can post fantasy points, but it doesn't mean he's playing good football. The Browns produced a lot of fantasy points. It didn't mean that they were playing good football, which is what perpetuated that change to DTR, even though DTR's ceiling is significantly lower and the floor is just as low. So like, I have this concern that, like there are going to be flashes in the pan of fantasy production. Cause I think we saw Jerry Jeudy come into his own. We saw Cedric Tillman. Like they do have pieces. I just worry that the biggest pieces of all are going to be problematic in terms of, like, we see flashes from Kirk Cousins in terms of production, but weirdly, the further he got out from his Achilles this year, the worse he got. It's just too many question marks for me, and I don't know that any of these guys have enough upside for me to go all in on. How about a team like the Titans?
I mean, I
Because they have
don't
more
really.
promise to me than the Browns.
They see. I like Cleveland better than the Titans, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah. I think the Titans are going to be certainly drafting a quarterback at number one. And I don't particularly like this quarterback class very much. I think Calvin Ridley, who I think is going to be 31 this year, has me already scared. Tony Pollard was fine this year, but he's got a lot of miles on his body. And then I just don't know if they have enough other intriguing options in this offense. That's probably one that I'm avoiding as well. Can I give you one, Kate, that I'm kind of completely out on?
Yes.
The Las Vegas Raiders. So we haven't heard anything about their coach situation yet, but Antonio Pierce went up to the podium yesterday, answered questions, and he said that he hadn't been told anything different. I just with Antonio Pierce installed as a head coach, I really have concerns about what the offense is going to look like moving forward. There's no great quarterbacks in free agency out there outside of Sam Darnold, and I think he'll be back in Minnesota. They don't have a top 5 pick. They have Brock Bowers, who was already being valued at tight end 1. I just don't see anybody else in this offense that I want to go out and grab. On top of that, Kate, they play their division, Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos. All 3 of those teams have awesome defenses. And then next year they play the NFC East and the AFC South. So you're going to be playing defenses like Philadelphia, Dallas. I think Jacksonville's defense is going to be better next year. Houston's defense was already really good this year. There's just not very many layup games for an already bad offense. I'm out on the Raiders until they change the coach.
Until forever. The Raiders are not a good situation in general, because I think we're also starting to see, like, Max Crosby. I feel like he's at his wit's end. And I feel like once you have Max Crosby, that's kind of like halfway out the door, not believing in this head coach, not believing in this overall vision, it feels like, we're headed for a complete rebuild. But like you mentioned, don't have that high-end draft capital. Don't have any answer at quarterback. Don't have this. Don't have that. Like, it's a really big laundry list for the Raiders, and I think that it's going to take a lot to kind of navigate this rebuild with the resources that they have. It's not necessarily like, I don't think their receiving core is the worst. I love Brock Bowers as a top receiving option in this offense. I like Jacoby Myers. I like Michael Mayer. Like, they have pieces, but the question is, who's going to get them the football? They don't have a sustainable run game. Their defense is not good enough to play possession football. And I think Antonio Pierce, probably the biggest, what do they say? It rots from the head down. No offense.
Yeah.
Antonio.
It's not great. Any other bad offenses that you wanted to mention real quick?
I think that's enough negativity in my life for today,
Okay.
Marcus.
Yeah, let's get to some lessons about this, because we can look at some of the offenses that really improved from this year and kind of look at what changes happened and made them go from bad to good. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories this summer was going to a comedy event with my wife and a couple friends. It was so much fun. The energy and the excitement were unforgettable. Now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking at some playoff tickets for this Buffalo-Denver game. Gametime made it super easy to find tickets. Plus, you can get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. Kate, let's talk about some lessons that we've learned. How do we know which offenses to identify, which bad offenses to identify this offseason?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is identifying a quarterback that you believe in. And we look at, one of the most improved offenses this season, and that was the Washington Commanders. And you know what? I wish I would have gone more in on some of the playmakers there in Washington, especially Terry McLaurin, because of the fact that Jaden Daniels was a guy that I believed in full-heartedly. I believed in not just his acumen as a rusher, but his ability as a passer. And I didn't go all in on Terry McLaurin. That's one of my biggest regrets all offseason. So when I'm looking at some of these, offenses that are bad right now, I want assets that are tied to the quarterbacks that I believe in. I want, even though Caleb Williams, again, kind of a disaster of a season, but I believe in him as a quarterback for what his upside can be in the right environment. I want the Rome Odunze, right? I want the DJ Moore. The Drake Maye, there's absolutely no discernible weapons in like the tri-state area there in New England, but I believe in Drake Maye as a prospect, and based on what we've seen so far, that when he gets the tools around him, that he's going to thrive.
I'm also big on the play caller. Like, you look at some of these play callers of the top offenses in the league: Ben Johnson, Joe Brady, Todd Monken, Liam Cohen, Cliff Kingsbury, who we actually predicted was going to be pretty good this year because his style meshes well with Dan Quinn. Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore. Like, most of the teams that have top 10, top 12 offenses, even Denver. Now, Denver doesn't have a top quarterback, but they have Sean Payton calling the plays. I'm looking at the play caller as just as important as the quarterback, because that kind of sets the ceiling. You look at a lot of these bad offenses like New England, Las Vegas, Chicago, Tennessee, Jacksonville's play caller just got fired with Doug Peterson and Press Taylor. The Jets, like, all of these bad offenses have bad play callers, and some of them have bad, combination of bad quarterbacks and bad play callers. So I can get behind average quarterbacks if you have a great play caller, and maybe that'll be the case for, let's say, like the Patriots if they hire Ben Johnson. But it can't be both.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. Another thing I want to mention is just resources. If you have a team that is in a bad position, in a position for a rebuild, what kind of resources are they working with here in order to achieve that rebuild and make their way back? I look at a team like the New Orleans Saints, for example, who, financially, they're always in a pretty bad position, but every move they make, every contract extension they make feels like they are digging themselves further and further and further into cap hell. And, again, they're not a team that has a top 5 pick to sneak their way out of. They always feel, just kind of good enough to, not have one of those top tier options, but they're never good enough to win a ton of games. And I worry about, their ties to Derek Carr, the asinine extension they had with Alvin Kamara. Like, all of these things are moves that are going to handicap them in the future when they're looking to actually blow it up and spend some money on resources that will actually improve their team long term.
And it's also to remember the ownership matters too, because there are some teams out there that have $100 million in cap space, but the owners just might not want to spend that, or they don't have the cash to spend that. Now, the Raiders don't have that much cap space as I'm using, but they also have an owner that doesn't have the cash to give away $45 million as a signing bonus right away. So try to figure that part out as well. I know that can be a little bit more are a little tougher to find out. But I agree with you. Assets, draft capital, cap space, and an owner that'll actually spend money. That's the quickest way for you to improve on offense. And if you can find that coach quarterback pairing, you can a lot of times get those guys a lot cheaper than maybe what you expect.
Yeah, once I think the coaching cycles settle and we see how the coordinator switches pan out this year, we're going to have a lot more information about which of these offenses we actually, can feel super confident and apply these lessons that we've learned here today into buy low targets moving forward. So I'm sure this offseason we're going to circle back to this episode, these takeaways, and apply them once we have kind of the dust settling. And every offseason there are teams that ascend seemingly out of nowhere, but when we look back on what maybe we could have identified ahead of time before that ascension, we can usually walk away with some lessons. And I think 2024 especially offered plenty of good examples about how to find these teams and how to find these values, because buying low in Dynasty is what is going to help you build these long-term Dynasty rosters that win championships.
Last thing before we go, what's the one offense, if you had to recommend to our listeners to go out and start buying pieces from, which one would you say?
Jacksonville Jaguars.
That's mine as well.
I think Ben Johnson seems like the likely move here. I believe in him as a play caller. And you know what? Looking at the talent there, I think it's a really talent-rich team that's had a unfavorable ecosystem. I love the Jaguars.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter @KateModjuk. I'm @Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.